And with that, we are live. Welcome, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome back to the Light 'em Up Lounge for another inspiring conversation, live session with a very, very special guest. And I'm truly happy. I was so much looking forward to today's session. And we have no other than Tim Ozgener joining us today. Tim, it's a pleasure, a privilege, and an honor to have you with us. We'll talk about the past, the present, the future of the premium cigar industry, which you have shaped and truly impacted and influenced over the past 4 decades, I dare saying. So thank you so much for taking the time joining us today, and welcome again to the Light 'em Up Lounge.
Reinhard, thank you very much. It's my pleasure and honor to be on with you. And I see there are some special guests that I know and love. And you know, I love the business. I love the product. I love how it brings people together. And I feel like everyone that smokes cigars are brothers. You know, like they say, the brothers of the leaf is a great saying. So thank you very much for having me.
I couldn't agree more with that. And I want to give a big shout out to our family of the Leaf, all the friends, regulars, fellows joining us, whether here via Zoom or over on the Facebook live stream. As always, if you have questions, please chime in, make yourselves heard, or put your comments and your thoughts underneath the live stream over on Facebook. I'm always checking so we can forward your questions to Tim here at the lounge. Now, Tim, I wanted to ask you, when you look back at the time span from now until the moment you decided to return to the cigar industry and venture back into this mesmerizing and truly unique industry, when you recap, how do you feel about it? Kind of the stock market analysis. Do you feel bullish or bearish about it? What's your perception looking back on that comparatively short time frame?
Yeah, so Reinhard, my overall opinion, honestly, was you know, I really love things that have to do with the palate and flavor. And I mean, you know, Jose Blanco and I were talking before, and you know, he knows very well because he and I explored the nuances of flavor. You know, and even when we were working on flavors by CAO together, you know, the difference between like a 8% flavoring and a 10% flavoring, even though it sounds negligible, depending on what the nuance of the ring gauge, it changed. So I've always been a big fan of things that have to do with explorations of the palate, whether or not that's like cigars, bourbon, wine, cooking, certainly. And so, you know, while I was away from the business for about 13 years, I'd made friends with people that were bourbon makers, whiskey makers. And, you know, in Tennessee, the laws have relaxed. So you can now make whiskeys here in Nashville, where I am now. However, it's easy, but it's not so easy. So, even though you might have a good palate, and I believe people have good palates for cigars, bourbon, wine, cooking, it doesn't make it that you're going to be successful in that industry. And so I remember I had a conversation with Julian Van Winkle, you know, who started Pappy Van Winkle, the brand. And he basically said something very simple to me. He said that, you know, it's not as easy as it looks to get into something like that. So I love everything that has to do with the palate and the soil and the regions and you know, what are the components of the soil and how that gets translated into the stock and into a grape or a leaf or whatever it might be, or, you know, stock of barley or corn. But I spent, like you said at the beginning, you know, I grew up in the pipe, humidor, and mainly cigar business, because it's the same. When you're going to the conventions, it's the same people. So why reinvent the wheel? I already know this business. I have wonderful relationships. And it's really kind of, you're talking about delivering something that connoisseurs enjoy. So I like to operate in that realm. So that being said, I feel like that cigars have undergone like this kind of spike of interest and curiosity, and there's still a ways to go for our industry on how we educate and inform the consumer about cigars. So stuff like what you're doing, or what, you know, Jose does with his kind of podcasts is very important, because consumers are becoming more educated around cigars, but still there's a ways to go that we can provide them. So I'm actually quite bullish. So long as we're ahead of the legislation here in this country, I'm bullish.
Now, obviously, my question was also targeted at your personal feeling, and the reason I framed it that way is I heard numerous times that part of the decision for you to return was when you met with a business coach who eventually steered you in that direction and asked you the same question about how you felt about the previous part of your life, and
Yeah.
I learned that this was part of the decision, but I I can only imagine that ever since you made that impactful decision, it has been a bumpy road, probably, because everybody knows getting into the cigar industry is not that easy. It certainly helps if you
Yeah.
have 40 years of experience
That's right. That's
behind
right.
you, and a name that is clearly amongst the most recognized and most widely appreciated in the industry. But still, starting anew is always a big challenge. What were some of the biggest fears you had when you decided to go back at it and launch Ozgener Family Cigars?
Well, like you said before, I mean, I went through this exercise where I discovered, like, what is it that what is it that I love to do? What's my sweet spot? What do I love to do, and what do other people enjoy or appreciate what it is that I do as well? So in that, like you were kind of alluding to, that's kind of like a stock market. This year was good, this year was bad, and why? And in the end, my up years were all when I was in the cigar business. So that kind of reconnected me with getting back into it. As far as any sort of fears of getting back into it or trepidation, really, it's a couple of things. Number one is, some people, they may have a relationship or may know who I am, but a lot of other people don't know, and that's okay. I mean, I accepted it. Part of the fun of it is the journey of it. So I don't mind going out and pressing the flesh and meeting people and talking about the cigars. That's part of what I also enjoy doing. Part of it is two things, honestly, Reinhard. Was number one is you just got to find somebody that can. Sorry for the ambient noise here. I'm in the middle of Nashville, so there's a lot of activity. One is finding the right manufacturing partner who can try to execute what your vision is and your dream and what you want to convey visually through the cigar, and the story has a lot to do with that as well. Number one. Number two is, honestly, it's being able to to go out and have the stamina to go out and do these kind of promotions and in-store events. And then there's a lot of other little nuances that makes this a complex business, but ultimately you have to enjoy it. So I just had to kind of come to terms that if I love it, I was trained in improv comedy, and improv comedy, one of the basic rules is when you're in the scene, you're in 100%. So I always have that philosophy. If I'm in 100%. So I hope that answers your question. But probably the main one is you just want to make sure that you're getting the product right, and that you also want to make sure that elements of the packaging are right too, because I feel like my father always taught me, if you say I have the best steak and you present a steak, but then the sauce is running into the potatoes and the broccoli, whatever, then it doesn't look like you have the best steak. It is a reject. So you gotta present the product nicely too, on a nice, if you feel like it's quality, present it as such too. So
Was there ever certain thoughts that crossed your mind that you were worried how people would perceive you coming back to the industry, given your background with CAO, that people would probably compare the two and and have a certain preconceived notion about Ozgener Family Cigars, or what they would expect based on your previous achievements? Tim,
Oh,
you're
sorry, I
just
might have
muted.
been. Yeah, I might have muted. Okay. Well, to be honest with you, when I've been out there, there are most people they it's been like 13 years, so a lot of people they don't have as much of a memory or recollection with CAO. So I found that to be actually less of a factor. You know, the percentage of people that come in that have nostalgia for it, usually the nostalgia is a positive nostalgia. I did an event about 3 weeks ago up in in the New York and Philadelphia area, and some people came with these boxes that they got at a promotion that I did, which had to do with like deconstructing a blend basically and trying different components of it. So that part of it is nice, but for the most part, people have been like either very positive or a lot of new smokers out there too, which is great.
I couldn't agree more. Well, Tim, I know this is probably the most uninspired and boring question for you because you might have answered it 100 times. But given that we have a global audience with people joining us from China, the Middle East, Europe, Africa, the US, and Middle and South America, and you mentioned some people, especially the younger ones, are probably less familiar with the whole CAO success story and how it also became a role model, I think, for boutique brands to become truly successful and grow into a substantial global business. Could you give us the quick rundown of the family history, legacy, and inspiration? And not only that, I would like you to probably take a bit of a spin on it and share with us how those nuances have ultimately impacted how Ozgener Family Cigars was ultimately conceived.
Well, yeah. So my father and mother, I start with them, are both. My dad's an Armenian, born in Istanbul, and my mother is Turkish, born in Istanbul. They did not meet until they came to New York City, which was in the mid to early '60s. My father went to Columbia University on a scholarship as a mechanical engineer to get his master's in mechanical engineering. My mother was a Fulbright scholar going to Bank Street College of Education, right across the street from Columbia. They lived as international students in the International House, and they met there, and they fell in love. Now, it was a little bit of a forbidden love because my dad is Armenian, born in Istanbul. My mother's Turkish. So when they went on a date one time, famously, they're in Harlem, and my mother told my dad, "I want you to walk 30 feet behind me so no one sees we are dating." So all right, so fine. So my dad's walking behind her, and then all of a sudden she gets mugged because Harlem was rough in those days, and she's screaming, "And Jano, where are you?" And then he catches up, and he's like, "Where were you, woman? What the hell do you expect? I was 30 feet behind you. I did not hear or see anything." So they met, they fell in love, they eloped, and they came to Nashville ultimately because my mother went to Vanderbilt's Peabody School. Hang on, there's a guy on a weed eater, of course. So I'm moving inside. To sorry about this, Reinhard. I didn't want to have the sound be a deterrent.
No worries at all.
So
I think even your earbuds do a great job at noise canceling the background. So we're actually good.
Okay.
No worries.
Okay. So at any rate, so then they went to Nashville, Tennessee. My sister and I are both born here in Nashville, and my father, while he was working at DuPont as an engineer, loved these meerschaum pipes from Istanbul, but he did not like how the stem fit into the pipe, the shank of the pipe. Meerschaum is a mineral; it's fragile. And my father's like, well, when you shove in and pull out the stem, which is what was traditionally done, then it will cause the shank to have a fracture and break. So he was analyzing microfibers anyway. He designed a microfiber that you could twist in and twist out the stem. He went to some retailers that enjoyed it, and they said, "Can I order some from you?" And my dad, when he told me the story, he's like, "Son, you are Armenian. Armenians never refuse an order. It's like, how many you want?" So he took an order. And then people started calling our house in Nashville, which was the basement of our house, where he was operating his business. And they said, "Hey, We heard you had this stem that's for Meerschaum. Can we order Meerschaum from you? And put your initials in the stem so we know it's the same mechanical engineering improvement we heard about. And his initials were CAO, first name Jano, spelled C-A-N-O, which meant here in Tennessee, everybody called him Kano. You know, like, Kano, you want to play some tennis? You know, like that. And his middle name, Aret, and which is an Armenian middle name, and last name, Ozgener. So that's how we got the name CAO. We became well known for having the highest quality Meerschaum. That was first established in 1968, and he left DuPont in 77 to go full time for CAO. And then in the early 90s, when cigar smoking became more popular, we taught woodworkers here in Nashville, Tennessee, how to make solid wood humidors out of cherry, walnut, mahogany, and oak. And so we became more of a humidor company. So we had to reinvent ourselves from a pipe company to a humidor company. And then in 94, there was an opportunity to get into the cigar business. My father asked a lot of his colleagues at the trade show, and most of them told him not to get into it, except for one whose name was Peter Stokkeby, who had a pretty famous pipe tobacco brand. And Peter was like, Jono, screw what everybody else says. They don't want the competition. You get into it. So my dad got into it in 94 with a CAO branded cigar, again, from the basement of our house. We were shipping stuff out of the garage. And my sister and I worked on weekends to help him in building the business. And then, when we first came out with CAO, it was at the time of the cigar boom. So there was a lot of inconsistencies in products. For our product, it was supposed to be a chestnut brown colored wrapper, but one box would be chestnut brown, the next box would be green. So there was very consistency difficulties. So we weren't setting the world on fire with our cigars until 1998. And then we had a Maduro that came out of Costa Rica called CAO L'Anniversaire, because it was during an anniversary year. And that got very high ratings in Cigar Aficionado, and people started buying it, and it hit a sweet spot. And then I got more involved in the business around that time. We got pretty aggressive with coming out with like new products every year that were unique and different, and had a different kind of, different packaging, different presentation, so that it stood out in the shelf. So if people saw a green box, they would be like, really, is this a good cigar? But the retailer had a relationship with us for years, so they would say like, oh, it's a reputable company and it's good. So that's kind of how we got the momentum with the cigar company. And of course, we got into premium flavored cigars with Jose and Guillermo at La Aurora at the time. And that was the concept, was to create the Godiva flavored cigars, which we were able to do thanks to their partnership. And then, we were approached by Scandinavian Tobacco Group back in, 2005 or 2006. We weren't interested in selling the business, but they came back again. And at that time, that was when there was a lot of potential legislation with, S-chip on the horizon. And then we sold the business at that time. And that was back in end of 2007. And
I'm curious about that aspect. Something that kind of that kept bothering me, in a positive way, of course, was I've heard you recall the story and how a certain aspect of eventually agreeing to SDG's offer was that you saw dark clouds on the horizon and weren't so sure about the future of the premium cigar industry. Now, one could probably argue that from a global perspective, the tobacco and cigar enthusiasts are in a much more challenged and more difficult space than all these years back. Yet you decided to go at it again and start from scratch. How do you feel it's different now, or do you just don't care anymore about that potential issue and the looming threats?
Well, look, I feel like the industry actually has done a really nice job while I was gone in defining themselves more distinctly than they were before. Before, they were subject to being like lumped in with all other tobacco products, and now they've done a really good job of proactively branding what is a premium cigar versus what is a mass market cigar versus what is a cigarette. So, and I feel like the victory that the premium cigar industry received, almost 2 years ago now, was a big turning point. And also COVID, made the cigar industry actually big winners, because people are at home and people kind of, I think, rediscovered the art of smoking and the art of cigars, let's say, and what makes a cigar a unique product that should be in the same category as fine wines and bourbons and whiskeys and scotches.
I'm with you on that. I think the US most certainly has gotten a bit of air to breathe. Internationally, it's probably a different story, but I would agree on that part. Do you still think though that part of your decision making and the way you think, now that you've grown older and you very successfully sold the original family business, that you think about the business side of things differently, maybe more relaxed, because you don't have to prove anything anymore? Or you know what I'm trying to get to? If from a business perspective you just feel different now than way back.
Well, certainly, look, we have, like we've talked about, we have aggregate decades of experience now. So, I mean, I think that the way that we kind of approach things, and the people that I'm working with are also very experienced people too. That's the other thing that I took for granted, is that our internal team of core guys are very kind of experienced and savvy people, and they're almost like my family. We get along really well. So, hopefully that kind of, maybe that, I don't know if that answered your question. Like,
it does, yeah, certainly. And I mean, you probably can very hardly compare those two different moments in life, completely different situations, different economical circumstances and everything. But yeah, I think it's just fascinating, and obviously the whole industry was so excited and so happy to see you coming back and making that return to the premium cigar industry with all the values that you share with many other people in this industry, all the family history and legacy, and then sharing a different spin on that legacy with Ozgener Family Cigars.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly the welcome back that I received at the trade show last year was I mean, it was great. It was much better than I anticipated it being from within the industry, which is also what makes the industry special, is that, even though you have people that are, competitors hypothetically, that there's this kind of, I don't know, there's this kind of camaraderie and warmth that people have that make it really special. That's why I think truly we're kind of like, from a larger picture perspective, we're all kind of bonded, because we still have to kind of continually educate not just consumers, but also lawmakers as to what makes our product unique and special and should be kind of treated differently than other products. I mean, it really truly is, to me, it's not about nicotine delivery, and it's not about it's not about that. It's really about like fermenting the tobaccos to the most that you can, different varieties. It's like different spices that you're kind of combining into a blend, and then you're enjoying it in your palate. So I think that part of it is really important, that brings us together too.
Now, one of the key attributes and the business mindset I think that your father must have had in the early days and throughout his life was to question, how can we enhance people's enjoyment of a product, and how can we do better for people to truly feel that joy and appreciate a product. CAO was also kind of disruptive in a very positive way with some of the marketing concepts and the way you communicated product and marketed it. Do you think that in 2023 still the same core principles apply as to how you run a successful business or how you steer a company and try to lead it to a successful path?
Yeah, I think that you have to start with, who am I? And you have to do what's authentic to you, is the most important thing. So, I mean, that's what we try to start with, is like, what's authentic to me? Who are we, and what can you genuinely communicate with people over and over? I think that with CAO, certainly one of the things was, people want some pretty basic things with cigars. They want a cigar that draws well. They want a cigar that burns well. They want a cigar that delivers interesting, I think, and unique flavors and complexity. And I think that holds true whether it's a mild or medium or full-bodied cigar. Um, and so, you know, and I think people are becoming more interested in becoming more knowledgeable about the details of the cigars too, similar to how they've been with wine or bourbon in the United States case. So I feel like it's a little bit of the same but different. I mean, it's the devil is in the details. It's in the details of everything around the product. So it's not a and about like how you're running a business. So it's sometimes it's some simple stuff, but the simple stuff is not as simple as a whole, you know. Fortunately, in our case, also, we already had a distribution system in place, from the Crowned Heads network. So, and also, my kind of uniqueness, I kind of also recognize that I have a unique deliverable in that I have a story that's a unique and authentic family story that's been that I grew up with. So I really wanted to lean into that story because that story is kind of unique for me and my family, you know. So I really wanted to embrace that and not kind of run away from that. When we first started CAO as a cigar company, there was some talk on should we call it CAO, because some people are not going to call it CAO. They're going to call it CAD or CHOW or KO or whatever. And people called it all those things. It didn't matter. In the end of the day, my father's like, I don't care as long as they smoke it and enjoy it. Who cares? So, but I mean, okay, that's arguable. But that's kind of like, the point, you know what I mean? Is I think lean into what makes you kind of unique and
Mm.
and singular.
And even though times change constantly, and especially today, the evolution and the acceleration of how things progress and evolve, I feel is more intense than ever. And still, though, the same core principles apply. Our means of communication will always remain the same. Roughly, it's just the platforms and channels that change. You spoke about crown heads, and before we went live, we briefly talked about John Huber. Um, he started with you as I believe you called it the worst shipping manager, or your father called it the worst shipping manager, and he then started to be very successful with the company through his means of communication and marketing in the early days of online forums and boards and all that kind of stuff. And that was long before Facebook. A lot of things have happened ever since, but essentially it's those same core principles and the values that you hold dear that will carry a brand, carry a company, and ultimately make for the success of your business.
Yeah, I mean, again, and it's something that you have to be passionate about. I feel like if you don't have it in your heart and you don't care enough about it, you're not passionate, you're
Yeah.
not in it for the right reasons, then it shows in some
Mm-hmm.
form or fashion. So I think that's important too. I mean, yeah, some people say to me, I mean, that are friends and friendly competitors, like, oh God, why did you get back into this business? And so, like, these are people that I would argue that don't want to be in the business anymore, quite frankly,
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah.
they're tired of it for whatever reason. But again, I got back into the business because I enjoy it. This is what
Mhm.
I like doing. And I still, even though cigars have had undergone a renaissance, I still think that there's a lot of upside and ceiling to go with premium cigars, so long as we can stay ahead of any sort of legislative threats.
Very true. One thing that I very much enjoyed in your earlier statement is how your wish is to take the family history and who you are, what means the most to you, and make that the core of your business and everything that you want to share with the world. And the cigar being the the stage or being the vehicle of how you share that with the world. Now, besides the conceptual thinking and the way you set up the business and probably the design of the cigar rings and the boxes, those are maybe the easiest elements to factor in certain pieces of history and heritage and family background. How do you think about translating that in the actual smoking experience? Because with CAO, you had an incredible inventory of so many different tobaccos from so many different regions, which you highlighted through various projects. How do you think about Ozgener Family Cigars reflecting the history and the background in the smoking experience and the aromaticity and the taste profile?
Well, I mean, in this case, with actually, it was about a 2-year process for to conceptualize, what is the ultimate kind of brand identity around the new brand. Um, that was actually, you know, that was a more I was lucky in the sense because I had made friends. We converted our warehouse into a contemporary arts center. That's a nonprofit here in Nashville that's doing quite well. So when we did that, I hooked up with a guy who had worked with like Nike and Google as like in brand design. So he kind of took me through a process of how do you start a brand from nothing. And how you start a brand from nothing is you got to start with kind of there's a really good book on the market called Start with Why by Simon Sinek. And so we studied that book and read it. And you just have to start with like, why are you doing this? Why is it important? Who are you? Because I think if you don't start with that and the heart and you know who you are and why you're doing it, then ultimately you may not be as successful, or the brand may not have like authentic kind of roots from where it started from. So that process of coming up with like, who are you and what's important to us, and in the end we had like these 4 circles that were concentric in the middle, which had to do with the flavor, the ingredients, and then the details of how they're made, and then good humor. And by good humor, yes, we want people to laugh, and we like imitating and making jokes. Although my father would say like, okay, too many jokes, enough. So there's a certain amount where you can't make jokes anymore. But it also means good humor, like how are you enjoying the cigar? Who are you enjoying it with? Um, are you all friends, or you have a relationship, or it could be somebody that you're not friends with, but you just want to gain an understanding with them through the common bond of a cigar. So once we started with that, we were like, how do these 4 circles kind of come in the middle, and what are the things that kind of help? And so we started there and built up kind of around the story of my parents being 2 immigrants from like Armenian and Turkish, really kind of very complicated and antagonistic almost relationship, but they overcame that through love and mutual interest. And so once we have that, it's a very complex story, right? So how do you want that to be conveyed through the cigar? When we had sold CAO, after time had passed, after like 2 years had passed, we got together, and it was like myself and John and Mike Conder, and we wrote down like what were our learnings and what's the most important thing when you're kind of working with a manufacturer and having that relationship. And we had a lot of different categories, but the one that really stands out to me was trust. And because if you decide you're going to make a cigar, let's say if you're us in Nicaragua, I could have the most beautiful legal document drawn up here in the US, but it's not enforceable in Nicaragua. And it may not be enforceable in the other countries too. So what is it predicated on? It's predicated on like a handshake deal, and kind of, it's almost like the purest of business arrangements. You just have to have like this, your reputation is super important. So, that was kind of, unfortunately in our case, when we first came out with the cigar, it was with like a newer factory that I didn't have that much of a relationship with. And then subsequently there was a bit of a, all of a sudden a legal battle, which I had nothing to do with, nor did I want anything to do with. And so, but, Ernesto Perez Carrillo was a friend of mine for 30 years. And he knew my father also very well. And so, I'd asked him, I said, Ernesto, we always really kind of esteemed you highly for your reputation. And, we would be honored if you could make the cigar. And, I showed Ernesto this whole PowerPoint. It was about 160 slide PowerPoint that I was describing to you, and how you started from nothing to create the brand. And Ernesto understood it. So in this case, having the access and having the artistry and being able to make the cigar to convey what the complexities of the story was kind of the important thing. And fortunately for Ernesto, he's able to deliver and maintain consistency of the product. And we have, there's been like zero draw issues or burn issues from the product that's coming out of, his factory, Tabacalera Alianza.
Did you have a clear profile in mind as to where you wanted the cigars to land in terms of the aromaticity, the taste? And do you also feel that, because when I think about Turkish Armenian background, I imagine a lot of intensity, lots of spices, rich food, and most certainly a flavorful and colorful expression. Is that what you also had in mind, and how you wanted it to be preserved and presented in the cigar?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say that because of the fact that I had been, when we first in the early 90s came out with the first CAO, and it wasn't selling. I was in LA at the time. LA had no tobacco tax at that period. 1, 2, all of these celebrities were smoking cigars. Arnold Schwarzenegger was having cigar dinners like every week in Santa Monica, and I live near there. So I mean, I was in the kind of epicenter of the cigar kind of heat at that moment, and we had a cigar that wasn't selling. So I would go to people's smoke shop and I would be like, Reinhard, help me out here. How can I sell in your store? And he'd be like, okay, look, Tim, this sells, this sells, this sells. And I would buy it from you. And then I'd try them. So I've been doing that like since the early. So after a amount of time, you start gaining a palate and knowledge of what it is that people like, number one. And number two, then you get more curious about trying things that pair well with it, whether it's food or so. By kind of osmosis through the decades of me doing that, my palate now is more oriented towards, I want things that are complex. I don't want things in cigars. I do not want to get sick. So I do not appreciate this thing that is out there where you under ferment the tobaccos so that you get a nicotine buzz. I don't understand it. I don't want to get a nicotine buzz. If I want a nicotine buzz, I would buy some cigarettes. I'm not interested. I want the tobacco needs to be fermented so it burns well, and I'm getting, the maximum potential flavor without the nicotine getting in the way of that leaf. That's what I'm interested in. And so when you do that and you combine them, then you can get to the maximum potential of every single ingredient in the cigar. So Reinhard, what I'm trying to say is that, like, yeah, we want to have complex cigar. I mean, everything that we want to put out there, we want it to be complex, maximum potential flavor, and perform consistently well. So, I mean, and honestly, you know, we had a cigar that was a limited edition item that was a milder cigar, but even that was complex. You don't have to be a fuller bodied cigar in order to be an interesting cigar, in my view.
Which probably is more challenging in how you put it together, because most people would argue it's probably easy to create a spice bomb or a cigar that's overly peppery and a cigar that's very heavy on the nicotine side and very strong, but to find the delicate nuances and the complexity in a cigar that's less pungent when it comes to the nicotine impact is probably the more challenging exercise even.
Yeah, well, you know, I feel like that it's also challenging in a way of like trying to kind of convince a cigar connoisseur to try it, because they have a preconceived notion that if it looks a certain way, that it's going to be a certain way, and that may not be always true.
Good point. I also enjoyed when earlier you said during your hiatus from the industry, you explored other fields of expertise and interest, close connection to wine, spirits, food, and drink. My personal background is in the wine and spirits industry myself and in hospitality. Um, and I very much love the analogies. Also, I very much relate to what you mentioned earlier, how the cigar industry could do better in educating consumers compared to, for example, the wine industry, where you have plenty more transparency in a certain way of how information regarding the manufacturing and the blending process are conveyed. But I'm also curious, would you say that your palate somehow changed during those years? And I don't know if you smoked less cigars comparatively, or maybe less fumas and pure grade tobacco compared to when you were with CAO. But was there a certain shift in the way you experience, perceive, and enjoy cigars?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, when you're in the middle of it and you're out there, whether you're in the field or you're in like, you know, Central America, you're smoking more cigars, no question, right? So, I mean, and when your kind of daily habits kind of change on what you do, then you know, in my case, my consumption of cigars changed as well. Um, but I would say that also I was always very cognizant. You know, when first Cigar Aficionado came out in the early 90s, that was the first kind of cigar boom. They would have all these ratings that were like, you know, hints of orange peel and hints of anise. Now I'm in Tennessee, so anise has a different meaning, but that's just that's a bad joke. But anyway, like, you know, it's but you know what I'm saying. There are things that like how are these guys having this kind of lexicon of flavors? And then I talked to some of them, and they were like, well, we like to go and try different foods. Okay. So I said, I'm going to do the same thing. So I started going and trying different foods. So I'm a pretty adventurous foodie because I'm trying to understand, you know, what is izakaya taste like? What does Korean food taste like? What does Vietnamese food? What is authentic Mexican food? What, I mean, those are all like, do you know what I mean? Like Jose, what does goat taste like? You know, so I mean, like all of these. Jose, and on top of being an Argentinian cork collector, also like served me some good goat in the past. Like, but you know, all of these are good in kind of educating your palate, so that when you can taste something. I also like tasting the tobaccos on their own, 100% what they are, depending on what the inventories are, because then you know what spices you have in the cabinet. And also, I got into cooking right before the pandemic too, which I enjoy. And so then, what, you know, how slow are you cooking something? What spices are you combining? All of this kind of thing. So you know, uh, yeah, I think that all of those, when you like put them all together, it leads you to kind of have your palate kind of skewed in a certain way. Um,
Is that
And
also
I
how
think
you
that
communicate with Ernesto in the process when you create new blends or when you're working on stuff? Do you use some of those analogies and some of the vocabulary to try and translate what you're ultimately trying to get to with the cigars?
so when we were working in Honduras and Nicaragua in particular, and then when I was working with Jose and La Aurora, it was another different kind of dynamic and nuance. But when I was in, it was called Latin Cigars in Nicaragua and in Honduras. We were utilizing 40 different types of tobacco from 21 different countries. So, what I wanted to do is I wanted them to make puros of each one of those variants that they were using or potentially thinking about using in any existing CAO or potentially future one. In fact, I invited James Suckling, who came down with me to Honduras, and we had a conference room table with all of these puros. They were all like, I don't know, 4x40s perhaps in size of puros. I mean, we're talking about, we had Italian tobacco, we had Colombian tobacco, we had Cameroon, everything. And we tried them on their own, and then we took our own notes so that we kind of knew what things taste like. So I asked Ernesto to do the same thing for me at the beginning of the year. I went down there. Our salesman went down also, and we tried all of those, and it was really good. For me, they had a rating scale of 1 to 5, and he had a blind. So he had blind, Seikos, Visos, Ligeros, binders, wrappers that again, that he liked, that he was using regularly, or that what might be available. But I also had another column where I would write what flavors I pick up. So this is handy. Why? So that I'm working with him on future blends, I could say, can we try some of this or that? And we've already started doing that. So I think that's like a kind of to me, that's an important building block on how you are able to have some sort of a educated conversation with, your manufacturers.
Did you have certain epiphanies along that process where you discovered tobaccos
Yeah,
that you felt were completely underrated or
yeah,
less used in the
yeah,
industry but truly special?
yeah. Well, so for example, like, you have this perception that Seikos are not flavorful or not as flavorful. Completely wrong. I mean, it's amazing that, you learn something new every time that you kind of are open to it and you're in the right kind of scenario. So, but yeah, I mean, listen, there were Seikos that we smoked that I thought were fantastic. Um, there were the other thing that everybody loved was Connecticut Ecuador as a wrapper was it was unanimously, like, I think the most popular wrapper, and nobody even knew what no one had an idea of what it was. Some people did, but I mean, on its own, it's delicious. So that was the other one. The other one, honestly, that was quite interesting and well liked was, Dominican Olor Seco. For a lot of people had this kind of almost like brown spices. When you think of like kind of
Mhm.
a cinnamon or nutmeg type of, uh, um, so that's what I mean. To me, Piloto Cubano from Dominican Republic, that was excellent. And then some that are predictable, like, Esteli Ligero, I liked, so, or, Jalapa Viso, I liked, so Jalapa Seco even was good. So, yeah, there were some surprises, and then there were some that, one of them that was actually a big surprise to everyone was he had some, I believe it was Hamastron, either Ligero or Viso that we had one guy that was a relative newbie, and we taught him how to retrohale, and we thought he was going to projectile vomit at the table. Amastron Ligero. So it was definitely the highlight of our trip. We didn't go down there thinking that it would be. It was just something that I suggested to Ernesto, but then, he just had it looked like almost like cheroots. You know what I mean? Like you had like just, and we tried it, and it was great.
Brilliant exercise. I honestly wish that type of experience or information would be more readily available even to regular cigar consumers and enthusiasts, because it's such a critical component in learning and understanding leaves and blends in a much more thorough way. Yet, unless you go to the factories, it's probably hard to come by.
Yeah. Well, we did something like that before, right before I left, where we had a cigar that was called LX2, Ligero times 2, that was in essence utilizing 3 different Ligeros. I believe they were from like Esteli, Jalapa, and a relatively newer region that we called Pueblo Nuevo. And so we had Ligeros that each person could smoke like a 4x30 size of that, and then the actual cigar where all of them were blended. And people liked it. I mean, I still have people that come and talk about that to me, and they bring some boxes that they may have kept from that event.
Beautiful.
So yeah, I agree with you.
Tim, Brian over in California has a question for you, or a comment. Brian, always good to see you. Welcome back.
Hello. Thank you. Good morning.
Hey, Brian.
Hi, this is really enjoyable. I have maybe a fun question and then maybe a less fun question. Let's see. I don't know. With your Armenian heritage, I'm just curious if you're pals with Edward and Eddie Sahakian, and if there's any fun, interesting anecdotes or stories to tell about you guys sharing, some cultural, enjoyment or anything there.
Yeah. So with them, we had a really good distributor in London, and the distributor in London wanted to introduce CAO there, and it was introduced at a livery, which I was like, I didn't know what the hell a livery was, but and I still am not sure. But anyway, it was like kind of this cool kind of big sort of club that was like wood walls, and then I remember somebody came in with it looked like like from the Beefeater bottle with like a red outfit on, and rang a bell for people to sit down, and I remember our distributor was recounting that night with me, and the Sahakians were there, and I sat next to the Sahakians, so they saw all of this. But my father told our distributor, he's like, I want the cigar to be served in white gloves. So our distributor and his sales guys were running around town trying to find white gloves to serve these cigars in. And but I remember sitting next to the Sahakians and having a really nice conversation with them. They're wonderful people, gentlemen of the industry for sure.
Yeah.
But they shared in that funny moment.
Okay. Maybe this is one you can't answer or you don't want to, that's fine. But if it's taboo. So in terms of CAO now, obviously you're, no longer have anything, to do with the creation. I only have just had my first one, maybe half a year ago. So I don't know. I can't compare. So the big question would be, do you feel that the quality is on par with how it was when you were in charge, or has it changed, or I would say decreased?
Well, honestly, I don't know. I mean, because I haven't really smoked that many CAOs since I've come back into the industry, to be honest with you. I mean, now I've gotten into the habit of when I'm out there, I'll try to, buy some other cigars from other manufacturers and try those. But honestly, I haven't had an opportunity to smoke any CAOs. I'm trying to think. I smoked stuff that maybe came out after I left. Like I've smoked the CAO Flathead a few times, and I liked it. But I haven't really had an opportunity to smoke that many CAOs since I came back in. I've spoken to Regis Broersma, who is kind of the chief executive of Scandinavian Tobacco Group, and he said that they're very pleased with how CAO is doing. It seems to me, from what I'm seeing, it's like more of a catalog-oriented brand now as opposed to what it was before. But they seem to be happy with it and pleased with it. So obviously, since it has my father's initials on it, I would like for it to do well and still have kind of, and still kind of carry on, his initials and his name. The way that they want to go about selling it and the strategy behind building it, I don't know. I just obviously want them to do the best that they can with it.
Great, fascinating. Thanks. Cheers.
Yeah, sure.
Many thanks, Brian, for your question. Jose wants to say hello, I think.
I can't, first of all, I had asked Tim to be on our show when he still did not announce it. He says, yeah, we'll get back to it. And I said to Carlito, because I already knew he was coming back, and I said, today, and that was like 6 months, I think it was like in November, and he came out and I said, Tim is coming back. And Carlito says to me, you sure? And I said, look, I've worked with Tim. I know him very well. I knew his father very well, his mother, Eileen, Huber, Condor, everybody at CAO at that time. And like Reinhard said, and I told this to you because we talked a couple of times, you cannot imagine how many of your fellow manufacturers were so happy for you to come back. First of all, because what you did with that company brought a lot of excitement, a lot of innovation, brought a lot of new smokers. And at the end of the day, you sold for whatever reason it was, but you came back. It's like in The Godfather 3, when I thought I was out of it, they pulled me back in. One thing I do have to say, Tim, I've been following you because I see you're out there doing your events. You're passionate about it, just as passionate as I am. And I do have to confess, because I've been asked this question. One of my top all-time favorite cigars, I can live to be 100, will always be the COA Extreme. That is everything you wanted in a cigar and more.
Yeah. I remember when it first came out, Jose and I would have these conversations that would be like these. Every time was at least an hour, and after at the end of every conversation, Jose would be like, "Tim, make sure you are sending me a box of CAO Extreme."
Yeah, that is.
I would always send you whatever is new that you wanted.
No, definitely. I always say that on another show, I'm a big time mooch. But anyway, I know I told you that I was going to send you an address for something you're going to send me. So I'm going to be in the States in a couple of weeks. So I know you got some old stuff, and don't tell anybody.
Okay.
Tim, always great to see you.
Send me where you're going to be, my friend.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Many thanks, Jose. And Cem, great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us today. Please chime in, my friend.
Thank you very much, Reinhard. Very nice to meet you, Tim. I guess I have a question with two parts. The first one being, if you've covered it, obviously, I can listen back the recording. But how did it come to selling CAO cigars? What was the kind of the main driver behind it? And then related to that, is there anything? Obviously, you worked there, and then you worked after as the president, if I'm not mistaken, of the brand after the sale. Is there anything that you wanted to maybe replicate with your own brand now, but due to maybe competition rules, you cannot do, like, I don't know, using a certain type of tobacco or certain type of blend that's kind of imposed due to that sale of the CAO brand?
Yeah, so I'll start with the second question first. So there's really nothing that, what we can't do is we can't violate the trademark. So I can't come out with something that has CAO in it, nor would I want to, and nor would I want to do something that kind of crosses the line and infringes upon their trademark. So I wouldn't do anything relative to that. As far as like, what can we do that is in relationship with like the components of the blends, there's nothing really stated to do that. I don't think that we would purposely want to do something that imitates, for example, Brasilia anyway. We're kind of on a new path with a new kind of brand and a new identity and a new kind of approach to how we want to, at CAO, what we eventually fell into is we tried to represent a lot of times what are the tobaccos that we want to highlight. So if it's Brasilia, then we wanted to highlight Brazilian Arapiraca tobacco. If it was Italia, we wanted to blend around some Italian fillers from Benevento that we were able to get our hands on. So a lot of things went down that kind of path. But with our new identity, it's not going down that kind of a road so far. It's going down a bit of a different road that is kind of more based on like, who are we and what's important to us, more of that kind of path. As far as like selling CAO and, why we wanted to do it, I mean, we didn't really kind of ever have the objective to sell CAO. It was just sort of like when we had a distributor that was, in England, and he had sold his distribution company to Scandinavian Tobacco Group. And he called me one day and he said, because that these guys in Europe, they're very keen on entering the US market with a prestigious brand. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. What type of brands are they looking at or thinking about? And he's like, well, a brand quite like yours. And I was like, oh, I had no idea that was coming, but that's kind of what got the balls turning. We always felt like if someone feels positive enough about your business to want to talk about acquiring it, that's quite a compliment. And, you should at least listen and not react in a negative way, because it's actually a compliment. So that's how that kind of ball got rolling, and they had made an offer, and, we analyzed it, which was an interesting exercise, because you have to analyze what's the type of offer and what does that mean after taxes, basically. And we felt like that was, we thanked them very nicely. We said, we're honored that you thought so highly of our business to make us an offer. We're going to decline because we feel like we can grow the business more and we're having fun. And then, we were very polite about it, but then they came back a little over a year later, and they were more serious the next time around. So then when that happens, you just have to weigh what are the pros and cons and what are the risks. And, all of our family's equity was in tobacco, and tobacco was being under threat by increase in excise tax and potential litigation. So, obviously it was like it was an emotional kind of decision, but it's something that that we felt, there weren't at the time that many potential kind of suitors that would do that for your business. So you just have to make a decision based on a lot of different factors, but it wasn't an easy one for sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Jim, are you Turkish?
I am indeed, yes.
Memnun oldum.
Ben de memnun oldum. Çok teşekkür ederim.
And Tim, if you haven't seen or heard about it, Jem runs a very interesting blog called the El Lector blog, and he's doing a great job communicating about premium cigars in many different languages, but amongst them, of course, Turkish, to keep the local cigar community up to speed there. So for everybody joining us from that part of the world, please check it out. It's a very interesting one.
Is Jem in Istanbul?
I was pretty much 100% up until 5 years ago. Now I'm in London, but I do obviously go back a lot back to Istanbul whenever I can, and obviously due to business as well.
Well, maybe I'm sure Reinhard can put us in touch after we're off
Definitely.
the pod.
With great
Yeah.
pleasure, of course.
Definitely.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great.
Would love to. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Teşekkür ederim.
Tim, I would like to ask you a brief follow-up on the question that Cem posed, and it comes from our dear fellow Macy, our resident lawyer, who unfortunately is in litigation today in southern Florida. But he was curious if you think that the selling of CAO, was that probably the beginning of a trend in such mergers and acquisition, or in some sort of consolidation in the premium cigar industry?
Well, from what I've observed coming back, I mean, I think that, you know, perhaps that it was, and that certainly it's made Scandinavian Tobacco Group definitely a player in the premium cigar industry. They weren't before. That was their first kind of entry into the premium cigar world. Now they've becoming, you know, they've become pretty aggressive, you know, within kind of growing their, you know, growing in importance in the premium cigar world. So I would say that relative to Scandinavian Tobacco Group, yes. With the others, I don't know. You guys probably collectively know, but it seems to have it seems like that the answer is probably yes there too.
I forgot too, Tim. I was going to say when I asked my questions and I didn't give my compliment. I had the Bosphorus was included in a Cigar of the Month club that I'm in, and it was great. I loved it, and especially the band. This band is killer. I don't know how.
Oh, thank you.
How or who created that, but it's amazing, and the cigar was really good too. I just forgot to say that earlier.
Thank you. Well, you know, I mean, again, we work very hard on every aspect of it. You know, we want to make sure that the, you know, especially if you're going to be trying it, we obviously want the cigar to be as good as it could possibly be. But also, you know, we want the story to be conveyed on the band, and the band to be memorable as well. And there are a lot of different options out there. So you've got to really kind of, you got to really, you know, be 100% on top of the details. And, you know, and it's almost like it's very difficult to get it always right, but you always can look to refine and improve little things. Like with the band, the first run of bands that came out, there's an O and a Z, and the O and the Z looked like it was kind of a blob of gold. Now we have a little bit more kind of definition that's coming out, where we put some black in there. So, you know, so that's just an example.
Very important remark, obviously, Brian. So never forget the compliments. Ian, over to you.
Tim, hi. I'm Ian from London, and very much enjoying that and learning new things. As you said, each time you do, you learn. So I didn't know about the fermenting, dealing with the nicotine. I was actually going to share a couple of things with you. I'm a member of the tobacco livery in the UK. And if you want to join the tobacco livery, then get in touch. And we're tobacco pipe makers and tobacco blenders.
Yeah, I love that.
And so if you're over in England, then get in touch and meet some livery men. And we have a number of events during the year. And you also mentioned excise duties. You know, it's extortionate here. I mean, it's now the equivalent of about $450 per kilo of tobacco. So, you know, a 20-gram cigar, you know, has a tax of about $9 on it, and that's before value-added tax and the price of it as well. So it's just ridiculous. But I wanted to ask you actually a bit about the design, and that you were talking about it just a moment ago about the design and you know, how you sort of deal with this sort of fairly small real estate on a tobacco, or, you know, on a cigar. There's not much to play with. Now, some people do bands that are almost the size of the cigar, and I think I had a Psycho 7, and you have to take the band off before you can even smoke it, because it's just enormous. But I just wondered, you know, what's the process for for designing the band. Are you doing that, or are you outsourcing that to designers?
Yeah, so in this case, it's something that I like to be involved in with that too, because when you're going and you're doing all these events and you're visiting different stores, and it was CAO, like we started with the U.S. market, and wanted to make sure that kind of we had a good establishment there, and then we kind of looked to Europe and the rest of the world after we had that kind of established. But when you go and visit different stores, then you're noticing things, and usually you pick up little kind of things here and there, nuances around it. But typically, once we had the brand identity set of we wanted to have the name of the cigars, one, and two, then what is the centralized logo. So we decided we were just going to call it like either, honestly, I don't care if people call it Oz Family Cigars or Ozgener. Ozgener's difficult to pronounce, I know. So it doesn't matter if they call it Oz Family Cigars or Ozgener Family Cigars. We wanted to have a symbol that was an O and a Z. In the case of here, there was a designer that I've worked with that he won an international contest, probably about maybe 15 years ago with Esquire magazine to redesign their logo, in which he carved their letters out of solid walnut, and he carved into them, and he had different patterns and designs on the inside of each one of the E, S, Q, and they were quite beautiful like lattice work. It reminded me of honestly a lot of patterns in pipes, meerschaum pipes that I'd seen growing up, which is why I think I liked it. So he kind of did the same thing with our O and Z logo. So if you looked in there, and then he quite studied extensively backgrounds of Ottoman art and also Christianity art, which is more on the Armenian side. So there's a lot of there's a lot of 8-pointed stars. There are a lot of 4-pointed kind of crosses within the details of the packaging too. So it was quite a complex procedure and process for him to get to that. But now once you have it and you're on the shelf, then whenever you go, you're always picking up other things. So it's seemingly once you have the main brand identity set, then you want to look to see how you can make that, as you said correctly, that small real estate kind of as unique and as impactful as possible. That's a good question. Yeah, no, thank you.
I was just going to say, the livery companies were set up as like trade guilds to teach people, to teach apprentices, and also to maintain quality standards in the trade. So
that's great. Okay.
The necklaces and the goldsmiths and all sorts of people, and it's there for quality control. Yeah,
that's great. That's great to know. I remember when I did the event at the livery, it was right in the middle of London. It was a lovely space. I'll never forget it. I mean, still when I saw the distributor, our distributor at the time, he had a company called Loretta Cigars, but it's been absorbed by Scandinavian Tobacco Group now. But still, it was very impressive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
From London to Dubai. Right. Good to see you again.
Good to see everybody. How are you? Tim, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, sir. I'm good. It's funny. I was just on a conference call with Miguel yesterday, and we were discussing your cigars and when are they going to be in Dubai and all of that stuff. So I'm very excited about it and looking forward to having them there.
That's great.
Can't wait.
Yeah, same here.
I'm sorry I had joined this call a bit late. It's Ramadan and you can't control your timings and things like that. But what I wanted to touch on is a question. I don't know if somebody touched on it before, and excuse me if I'm repeating a point, but it's very difficult when you get into a business that your father was into. And, you know, my late father, every time he was giving me advice on something and all of that stuff, and I would get pissed off or I wouldn't listen to him, he would give me that line that he always used to use, which is, listen, a father only wants one person to be better than him in what he does, and that's his kids. And so with the kind of name, with the kind of legacy your father has left behind, how do you see yourself taking that to the next level, if that is what you're seeking? And if that's not what you're seeking, how are you going to maintain or get the people to understand the kind of cigars your dad used to put together? If my question makes sense.
Yeah, sure. I feel like that, honestly, that it started with, I get asked all the time about our last name and what's our background and what's our story. And, my parents and how they met and how they kind of, how they sort of came to be as a couple. I felt, as I told the story over and over, was quite a unique and beautiful story in that they overcame perhaps like cultural taboos or biases. That like my father's mother, her name was Siranush. She was an orphan because her parents were killed in the south of Turkey by the Turks, during this this genocide, basically, or the proposed genocide. But she never raised my father with the knowledge of what happened, because she never wanted him to be raised with any hatred in his heart. And had she had done that, he probably would not have married my mother. But I mean, so that story in and of itself, and then they loved each other again because of shared mutual interests, love of education, love of arts and culture. They would go to museums together in New York City. They would go to operas and ballets as students. They had no money, but they would stand standing room only and go and see like Nureyev and Maria Callas and people like this. So I feel that's a beautiful story, and I didn't want to see that kind of story and that legacy that had been organically created through the cigar industry. And cigars are a product and a vehicle that loves a story. There are other industries that like stories, like we've talked about, like the spirits and wines. They like stories too. Consumers love a good story, and they love a true story. And they love an authentic story, and they also love to hear stories of people overcoming obstacles and hardship to achieve success. So I felt like that it would be a shame to have this story and this kind of legacy kind of fade away or not be told. So I never looked at it like my father was my best friend. He was my groomsman in my wedding. But he was also like my mentor. So I had a pretty unique relationship with my father. I mean, he could be difficult, tough on me, but that's fathers and sons. I mean, that's pretty normal. But I never looked at it like I'm trying to, outdo something with my dad. I don't, you know what I mean? I don't like, think about that. I just think about, this is something I love to do. This is a story I feel that needs to be told. This is a story that I feel has relevance, especially in this day and age when we have a lot of dissent and a lot of disagreement and a lot of polarization. It's a real life example about how you could have different perspectives and viewpoints and get along over a cigar. I always feel like if you're disagreeing with somebody, put them in a room, both give them cigars. When people smoke cigars, it's a natural meditation. You're slowing down your breathing. You're inhaling the cigars, holding it in the back of your palate, exhaling. You don't realize it, you're meditating. You're slowing down your breathing. There's still a little bit of nicotine you get in the tobacco, not as much obviously as a cigarette. You're not inhaling it, but you're getting it from the side of your palate. When that happens, it makes you more alert. So if you think about it, cigars actually put you in a really premium position to listen and connect with people because you're relaxing, because of you're slowing down your breathing, but at the same time, the nicotine you're getting a little bit. It's like a little bit of a caffeine effect. So I feel like that those two kind of, you have this kind of story that is a real life example of people getting along and overcoming their backgrounds to listen and respond and try to have some sort of understanding. And then the product serves itself well for that too. So, I mean, I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, but I mean, that's kind of, you know what I mean? Like why, what kind of motivated me in part, to get back into the business and have craft a brand that has this sort of identity.
It does. And I think there's a beauty in the story in the sense that, yes, you are building on the story, but you're definitely putting your own touch and definitely putting your own, impact on the whole, direction that you are basically leading and where you want this brand and where you want these cigars to be. And I think this is very important to highlight, as it's not simply a continuation, but rather, a building on an already, existing name and history that you potentially, and I think the blends of the cigars, the rings and all of that stuff says a lot, especially when connected to the history and the culture that's behind it. So yeah, I mean, you definitely answered my point, and you definitely highlighted something that I believe is important, which is the Tim touch that's going to be added to these cigars.
Well, thank you very much for saying that. And I just, again, I want to operate out of a place that is, 100% truthful and honest. Like, this is who we are. This is where we come from. Some people may not like it, and some people, and that's fair. That's their prerogative. But can't hide of who we are and what our background is. And again, I feel like cigars can be a really important peace pipe and bridge for people to gain understanding. You could have someone that is, got the highest profile white collar job, having a cigar with someone who's got the might be a blue collar job that is about as blue collar as can get, and they can get along and smoke a cigar together. It is a universal and affordable luxury, I believe, and I think that it's that part of the industry is also like underrated, underappreciated.
Well said. And I look forward to seeing you in PCA hopefully soon. I wish you the best.
Yeah,
that's
same
for
here.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful to have so many great questions from the audience and people joining us from all over the world. Much appreciated. And Sai, it's good to have you with us as well. Please chime in, and I'd love to hear your question as well.
Yeah, love it. Love the show tonight. Love listening to you, and it's interesting that you said about backgrounds, because I think I read before somewhere that your father said that a cigar brings all backgrounds together, and lets people put their guard down. So I think I remember that from Ken. But the question I wanted to ask, a couple of questions I wanted to ask you, is, forgive me, I was out in the storms, bloody stormy here, is that in the early 90s, when your father bought out his first cigar, he went, to Honduras. Well, everybody else was kind of for the Dominican Republic and stuff, trying to get in there, and Nicaragua and stuff. Why did he think that was the best idea at the time when others weren't following that path? And the second part of the question is about your father and art. And is it true that during his serious surgery, that an Irish, of course, the Irish thing here, that a nurse singing an Irish lullaby inspired him to go more into it? And as we know, he done like over 500 paintings, and he done so many things. Because I find his story and your family story fascinating, and I just wanted to know, just curious about those two questions, please.
Oh yeah, these are excellent questions. Well, I mean, the reason why we went into Honduras, quite simply at the beginning, was that you know, my father made friends with Carlos Turano. Carlos Turano at the time was more of a broker, to be honest with you. And he said, I will put you in touch with someone that, you know, can make a cigar for you. At the time, it was Nestor Plasencia, who, you know, even back in those days in the early 90s was, you know, the largest grower of tobacco for cigars in Central America, mainly out of Honduras. So Nestor had a big plant that was also making cigars out of all this tobacco that he was growing in Honduras. So that's the reason why we went to Honduras, was because, you know, Nestor had all this tobacco that he was growing there. He had a factory that was making cigars there. And it was, you know, honestly, at that time, cigars boomed. People weren't ready for it. There were a lot of people that were rushing to get cigars made to market, including Nestor. So, you know, that's why we went there. We had some cigars that came out. That's the one that one box would be chestnut brown, which was supposed to be the consistent color, and one box would be green. It's just because the demand was so high. I remember going down there. It was like a stock market. I mean, not like literally like, but it was humming. It was very crazy and chaotic and busy. There's kind of a blessing that those times are not like that now. Now the quality is much better. But that was why, like, you know, we went to Honduras for our first cigar. Our second cigar was made in Nicaragua by Nestor, which was CAO Gold. Actually, the first one was CAO Black Label. As far as my father with art is concerned, yeah, it's true. You know, he had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he had to have a stem cell procedure done. And that stem cell procedure was done in at a place called the City of Hope outside of Pasadena, California. And, you know, the stem cell procedure is very taxing. That's when they kind of zap all your blood cells and have to, you know, reharvest the good cells and reinfuse them in your body. And so it's very stressful on your body. And my father, you know, didn't think that he was going to be able to recover from that procedure. He was feeling at a, you know, almost like at an ebb in his energy and his maybe will to go on. And then there was a nurse, an Irish nurse, that came into his hospital bed, and she, you know, put her hand on his back or on his shoulder, and she sang him a Gaelic lullaby. And he was so moved by that he started to weep, and then she started to weep. And then from that experience, he then felt better. And then he kind of somehow connected with the colors of nature around him, but he liked more of the brighter colors, you know, so like the green of leaves or grass, or the colors of flowers, or the colors of birds, and started painting those. And then through that process, he wanted to always improve. That was always his nature. So we get that honestly, or I get that honestly, when we think about cigars. You know, even with painting, he took painting lessons. He always wanted to improve his technique. And by the end of his 10 years that he was painting, he became actually quite good, utilizing a lot of different kind of three-dimensional kind of aspects in his paintings. And so, and I mean, I think that he said that experience, that art saved his life, you know. And then we converted our warehouse into a nonprofit contemporary art center. We wanted to make it one that was like more performing and visual arts. So right now it's heavy on the performing arts, but it's doing quite well, and we're one of the top funded institutions now in the city of Nashville. But thanks for that question. That's a very nostalgic and I think important question.
Yeah, I think, and I just want to chime in one more second here, please. Yeah, I thought you were just saying about the Nicaragua cigar, when he was asked about, you know, was it better, you know, was it better than the Honduran one and all this? And I found his answer on that, to comparing it, that you can't compare the cigars. They're different. They're like his children. It would be like comparing his children. His child is different. You know what I mean? So I thought it was fabulous. I think his story is inspirational, absolutely inspirational, and it's fantastic that
Yeah.
someone, his son, of course, and others are keeping. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Sai. You're great, and part of the thing, the other reason I really enjoyed the cigar business is that it's such an international business. That you meet amazing people from all over the world, and I valued and missed that. So it's really great to have such an international forum over here, and thanks for your question. Very, very thoughtful and thorough question.
Yeah, and thank you. Or go to Mahagos, as we say here. That just means thank you very much in Irish. Go to Mahagos.
That's great. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Just as a quick follow-up, Tim, on the question that Sai posed, do you consider art and cigars to be two very separate passions of your life, or where do you feel that they intertwine and either influence each other, or where do you see like the amalgamation of art and cigars?
Well, absolutely, cigars are a work of art. There's no question. Cigars are a combination of art and science. And so, I find that cigars and the details of how they're kind of grown and harvested and fermented and aged and made into a blend, and how long they're aged, and then how you kind of package it is art. There's no question. So I feel like that there's definitely a lot of different parallels with cigars are especially, I'm talking about premium cigars now, obviously. I feel like there's it is an art. So I feel like that what we did by getting into starting an art center. And by the way, the other thing we do at the art center that I think is really important is that my mother always stressed to me the importance of kids and youth having creativity in their lives, because if a child is making something out of clay, or drawing something, or sees something from an artist who's living now, who might teach them how to do whether it's working with clay or dancing, that kind of taps into a part of their brain that helps them with child development. Of course, my mother is a PhD in early childhood development, so she this is what she studied. So I felt like she always made sure that my education was kind of oriented in that manner. And I've tried to do the same thing with my kids. And what we do with the artists that come to Oz Arts is they're in town anyway. Some of them are local, and we put them with schools and kids that have had arts programming cut, or they don't have the access, or they can't afford to have these kind of interactions. So I'm actually really kind of proud. I'm really proud that we do that, and I think it's really important. And I think it's like us kind of contributing to our society through our city in this manner.
Lovely. Kudos to that. Jose.
Tim, you were out of the business for around 13 years. So my question to you is this: coming back, tell us here 3 things that have shocked you the most and that you thought at that time you would never see in the industry.
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure if I can answer it by saying what has maybe shocked me the most, but I have given some thought of what are some changes that I've noticed since I've been gone for 13 years and back. So I can go through them. I think the first thing is people have become much more knowledgeable about the components of the tobaccos. That actually is a little bit of a shock to me at first. So, for example, in the Ozgener Family Cigars, hang on a second, the Ozgener Family Cigars phosphorus blend. So I had to bring a prop here. So I have the actual, box. So you can see the vista of it that shows what we've been discussing. But in this blend, you have, filler components that are, for example, from, Esteli, Jalapa, and Omotepe. I'm shocked how many people know what Omotepe is, for example. So now in the past, if I went down that kind of detail as to like what the components are for the tobacco, people wouldn't know what they are. Now they do. So that to me is very interesting. I mean, I even did an event recently where there was a gentleman, before I even said anything, he said, yeah, I think there's some Omotepe in that cigar. And Omotepe is interesting. It gives, so that's one change. And obviously it's because of things, that like, people like Reinhard are doing, and also the fact that people can Google things if they want to find out about them. So, that's one aspect that I found to be like really kind of interesting. The second one I found is that the traditional, I would say, retail tobacco ambiance and atmosphere is also now changing. People, they want to go to places where they can gather with people and smoke and drink what they want to drink. So that could be an environment that's like a brewery or a microbrew. That could be an environment that is more like a liquor oriented environment, or whatever it is. But I think that people, the more successful, at least I'm talking about now, I can't speak for Europe because I have not been there to see what's going on and travel through Europe extensively now. But in the United States, this is what I see as another trend, is that the people that are opening up places that are more like a lounge, bar, liquor store that allows cigar smoking, that is another trend that I've seen. And then the third one, I might have to think about what it is. Those are the two that kind of stand out to me in seeing. I'm sure that you probably can mention a third one that'll probably spark a comment, Jose. But those are the two ones that I keep kind of thinking about.
The one that I was going to tell you, and I've been around for a while. Some people say that I came in 1492, but
I thought of a third one.
No,
I know what you're gonna. I think I know what you're gonna say, but go ahead.
No, the one is, remember, back still to 2010, 2012, you would go into a shop with 1,000 square feet. It was huge. After Casa de Montecristo, and you know them well, Mike and Sam, did one with 8,000 square feet. Then you have Biggs in Chicago, 15,000. And then there's another one in Chicago that's 22,000 square feet. So I thought that would be something that would kind of shock you, seeing, 1,000, 1,500 was huge. And now you got 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 square feet. And they're making them bigger every day.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've gone to the Cigars International stores, and I describe those are huge. I mean, but that's basically like a microbrewery in my view, with a big cigar humidor. But then again, I mean, this is you're talking about, this is a wealthy conglomerate. So I mean, like if that's something that they want to do and they're finding traction and successful with it, then they're going to do it. But yeah, I mean, the other thing I'll tell you that I've noticed is that like you've got shifting demographics of people that are smoking cigars and what they're interested in. So you have, for example, like in the United States, you have the Black community is really enjoying cigars and becoming very knowledgeable about them, and really kind of that is increased. I feel like there's a lot more kind of youth that are coming into the cigar industry that are more kind of curious about it as well. So I feel like that our efforts of continually like educating people about how premium cigars are different and unique and how they need to be enjoyed is important. We've done a good job. We can do better and keep on doing it.
Tim, they're still raising their hands. They're still coming up. We want to be respectful with your time, of course.
No.
But
No. That's
I love
that's
that,
fine. That's fine.
I love that
That's fine.
everybody's
I'm
chiming
gonna. Yeah, no. I'm gonna move where I can smoke a cigar for now. For God's sake. Hopefully the weed whacker is done. Go ahead. I'm fine with answering questions.
We always joke when Brian is having the lawnmowers. I think they schedule it right around light him up just to piss him off. But yeah, many thanks for your patience and for staying with us. Mike, you had a comment or a question.
I do, Tim. Great seeing you. Sorry I missed you at a TPE back in February. I trust you had some fun with. Trust you had some fun with Rob this week while he was in Nashville. I wanted to ask you real quick. We've gotten to hear the story of Synesthesia through that release, and then of course the Bosphorus Strait pays tribute to the strait that separates Europe and Asia. Will we get to find out more about Ozgener family and the background and basically your heritage? Is that story being told through the cigars? Is that kind of the intention behind it? Other than paying homage to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing I had mentioned earlier, we always are trying to kind of tweak and add to, and it's just my nature through my dad, and so, we're going to be adding the story told in a brief way through shelf talkers that like fold inward when you open the box. It'll give you like the story of like the brief story of, Ozgener Family Cigars is about, it represents this, this is the background and story of how these two people met. And this is what the cigar represents, which basically just represents how, people of different backgrounds can come together and overcome obstacles and find understanding, basically. So we're going to tell that story in every single box. And then when it folds down, it'll have different information on that. And also we are, I'm glad you asked that. It's a good question. Is that I've found that when you want to start something, whether it's an art center or cigars, you got to start with the core first and then build out, almost like these circles that keep of a tree, right? So if you're growing a tree or you look at the circles of the tree, what's the kind of most important thing is you want to make sure the cigar is right, is really good, interesting blend, interesting components, interesting materials, and very important is the quality of the smoke. I mean, you could have the best materials in the world. You don't get a good draw on it, you're dead. So you want to have good draw, good burn, consistency. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're working with the right manufacturing partner, which we strongly believe we are in this case. So you have that, and then after that, you want to make sure that the story of the product, who are you? Why do you exist? Why are you doing this? Very important, because you get questions like I'm getting right now, which are the right questions to ask. And then after that, then you can get into the broader sense of, okay, now that we feel that the cigar is right, the quality is there, and the story is there, and the branding is there, then you can get to the marketing. So now we're at the stage where we found some marketing brains that we admire because of their track record of thinking outside the box and being not afraid to be a bit edgy. So we're in that process as we speak. So like right now, for example, we don't have a website. So that'll come. But we just wanted to make sure, and I'll also add to that, is that once you have the identity and the product, then we were going out and doing these in-store events, which is more like grassroots marketing. So when I'm doing these events, there are a lot of people that they never seen or heard of the cigar before. And you know, that's okay. That just gives you practice to repeat the story over and over and over, and to see what resonates with people, which helps you kind of in fleshing out or formalizing, you know, what your marketing messages need to be and what's resonating with people. So it's a really good question. But you know, the answer is that we're getting there, and yes, we want to tell the story more and more. But our focus was like pretty much on, like, you know, the beginnings and how you kind of, you know what I mean, like, you know, growing the tree and now getting it to become a more mature tree now that we have the roots established.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a former retailer myself, you know, being able to tell a story when I'm handing a cigar to somebody is, it allows you to make that connection with them and allows them to have a connection to the cigar, and really it breeds loyalty to the brand. So my hat's off to you, sir. Great work.
No, thank you. Thanks very much.
Peter, it's good to have you with us as well, of course, as every week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tim. I've enjoyed this immensely. I want to say thank you to you, and thank you to Reinhard, because I know there's a lot more work that goes into the show every week than we can imagine. When you were on the show last year, I was so enamored with your person, your spirit, that I went out and bought some of the Bosphorus and enjoyed them. And then I thought I might as well pick up some of the Pi Synesthesias as well. And I love that cigar. Both of them are exactly the way you describe it. They're complex. They have a lot of nuance without a ton of nicotine, which I really appreciate. And so if you never came out with another cigar, I would be ecstatic to smoke those two forever. But can you tell us if there's anything in the pipeline that I need to keep my eyes open for?
Yeah, so we just introduced a kind of a line extension for Bosphorus, and this one is called Aramas. So you know, the Bosphorus harkens back to you know, obviously Istanbul, and like, well, let me point right. So this is like, you know, the Bosphorus here, you know, which again, both my parents grew up in Istanbul, but it kind of represents more like my mother's background. And then we've got Armenia over here, and we have Mount Ararat. So we wanted to do something that harkens back to this side, which is more my father's side of the family. We tried to see if we could use the name Ararat, but Ararat, you can't. It was trademarked. And then, you know, an Armenian friend of mine told me that in Armenia, they call the mountain not Ararat, but they call it Masis. I did some research on it. It looks like the town is called Masis where it is, which is fine. That's trademarked too, so we couldn't use that. So we just said, let's just put together the two prefixes of Ararat and Masis, and we called it, or it's called Aramas. So it's a new brand mark. We just introduced it. There was a smaller trade show that is for like retailers that have been like established for quite a long time, and that was a couple of weeks ago. So we just launched it a couple of weeks ago, and we should be shipping it out into the United States market, I would say in probably about 2 weeks. So this one is quite a different blend. This one has a Mexican San Andreas wrapper, and the binder on it is Ecuador Sumatra, and the fillers of it are Nicaraguan with we put a little bit of U.S. Connecticut broadleaf in there, so it gives it this kind of nice dark chocolatey flavor to it, and it also has Dominican Piloto Cubano in there too. So it's again a cigar that it's complex, it's got a sharpness, but it also has, to me, I also like things with a little bit of not all the time, but having like a high percentage of cacao, like, you know, is also gives it a little bit of an interesting flavor too, that I find that's appealing in cigars. So this one has that. Now all of these sizes are round vitolas. So we have like one that's a 6x60, for example. We have one that is a torpedo that is a 6 1/4 by 54. You know, because Ernesto has a reputation for making 6x60s and torpedoes, some of the best in the world. So that's another little nuance. When you're working with somebody, you kind of want to play to their strength And those two sizes in particular, Ernesto is uniquely talented at. And then we have one that's a 5x52 and another one that's 5.5 by 55. That's my personal favorite size, is 5.5 by 55. So it's kind of like a Toro, but it's a thicker Toro. So you're getting more flavor, more breadth of smoke because of how it kind of touches your whole palate. So that's, and 5.5 by 55, we have it in the Bosphorus blend too. But thanks for asking that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I wonder how hard it was to source that wrapper, because a lot of the San Andreas I find have like a musty or a dirty flavor to them.
Yeah, no, Ernesto's San Andreas are outstanding. I mean, I would honestly tell you that, like, in this case, the kind of the chocolatey nuance is definitely there, the way that he kind of works those wrappers. It's really delicious. I mean, and that's actually another change that Jose asked about earlier, is that I would argue that, like, when I was in the business or when I left the business, I mean, Mexican San Andreas was not talked about, not utilized, it might have been utilized, but it wasn't as, people know it now and people seem to like it now. So that's it. That's another kind of interesting change nuance, because it used to be all about Connecticut broadleaf. And now it seems to be more like Mexican San Andreas has become the fashionable kind of Maduro or darker wrapper.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing.
No, thank you.
I want to make a point, Tim. You said something very interesting. Mexican San Andres was used. Some companies would use it as a binder. Some companies would even use it as a wrapper, but they never disclosed it was Negro San Andres because of perception.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And you and I talked about this probably quite extensively. Because I remember, Jose, you would say, like, well, do you know that this so-and-so is using Mexican San Andreas, but they're not disclosing what it is.
Yeah, a lot of people, because it was Mexican, would not say it. And there's a lot of tobaccos, like you mentioned Ometepe. I mean, I lived in Nicaragua for 2 years and I was familiar with it. At that time, it was only Nestor Plasencia that would be growing it. Now other people have started to grow. So you would have to really have a really tight relationship with Nestor to be able to get Ometepe. And let me tell you something, Ometepe is something that you put, like, maybe on a Robusto, maybe a half a leaf, on a Corona, maybe a quarter of a leaf, because it's a tobacco that dominates a lot to it. So I've seen people that have given me samples at the show, and then right away, when I write back to them, I said, this has too much Ometepe. And he says, how do you know? I said, because Ometepe is very, very unique, because it's grown in a part that has a lot of volcanic soil into it. And that has a lot of minerals. And that's why that tobacco dominates a lot.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like, you remember, Jose, when we did the CAO Sopranos edition for HBO in that show, that we actually ended up using Matafina wrapper for that. And now I find that Matafina and even Arapiraca, when we used Arapiraca for Brazilia's wrapper, and at that time nobody used Arapiraca, and Arapiraca was relatively, like, therefore not as expensive. Now Arapiraca per pound, Ernesto's telling me, has gotten more expensive than I thought, and Matafina has become more difficult to procure. But I mean, it's interesting now. I mean, I was even talking to some consumers that were like, I like Matafina, but I can't find that much Matafina, and I'm telling them they're searching for some of these old. I tell them, if you find any old Sopranos from back, when we were at CAO, that they should buy them, because they're just not that much out there. And I could be wrong, but this is just, I mean, Ernesto is telling me this, so if he's telling me this, probably not. But I mean, that just goes to show that the consumer knowledge around these tobaccos and what kind of flavor profile they give to the cigars is good. That'll help with coming up with more interesting, complex blends.
No, one thing for sure, the consumer of today is much more educated. The consumer, like even of 5 years ago. And it has to do a lot with the social media aspect. It has a lot to do with all the companies that started bringing people down the DR to Honduras, to Nicaragua and all that. Because at the end of the day, I tell people, it doesn't matter if you've been smoking a year or 25 years, till you don't go down to a factory to see how cigars are made, till you don't go into fermentation, till you don't go into the curing barn, till you don't go into the fields and see how tobacco is grown, you're missing the boat.
Well, it definitely it definitely changes your understanding and your appreciation of the product 100%, because when you see all of the work that goes into it, then you come back and you say, okay, you value the product more. You value the product more, you understand it more, and you can talk about it more. And it definitely leaves a lasting impact on you, But like I said, you're always learning something in this industry. And look, I'll say this: Ernesto Carrillo's son is a very sharp guy. He went to Stanford, and then he worked for an accounting firm on Wall Street, and he left there to help his father, with his business. And he said to me, he goes, look, when I was working in finance, it, kind of became a little kind of pretty, I understood it. There were some patterns that became predictable patterns. But this industry, he said, is much more complex than I anticipated. So it's not a straightforward, it's not an easy business. It's not as easy as people think it is. Obviously, Jose and I have worked together for a long time, so he knows this very well too. But at the same time, there's an aspect about it that the pros outweigh the cons. And to go back to creative learning, one of the things that the school that I went to, or my kids go to school, and they did this every year. They ask companies, what's the most important characteristic for a student that is graduating from college? And number one, year after year, is complex problem solving. So, this industry is that, it's a complex industry, and you're always kind of trying to solve something because there are a lot of variables.
Excellent points, Tim. Very inspiring and truly mesmerizing show today, because not only have you provided us with a...
Yeah, go ahead.
Please.
No, that's why I'm saying that you've got to be really kind of have a degree of humility, because you always have to be learning. And the moment that you think that you have something figured out or right, you don't.
And that's exactly the point why we are here and how we come together. And what I personally love so much, not about Light 'em Up necessarily, even though it's a wonderful platform that gives us an opportunity to share those moments better, but about the industry in general. And it's fascinating and inspiring and heartwarming at the same time. And I can only thank you wholeheartedly for not only giving all of us a glimpse into your family background and history and your heart and soul, but also a deep dive into decades of industry experience and some of the critical evolutions that, as Jose always said, brought us to the dance, because we have to remember and we have to cherish those traditions and perpetuate them in the most the most honest and humble way, I feel, and then we'll be in a good position, and the cigar industry is in a good position moving forward. It certainly is with you.
Yeah, thank you. Also, one of the things I always remember, going with my dad to when you talk about like, Europe and Germany and like, there's a big show in Dortmund. I remember going there very distinctly with my father. And after the show was over, we all gathered in this bar area. And, people were smoking pipes and smoking cigars. And you had all these people from different countries. And people were laughing and they were relaxed. And I just always remember that was like a really kind of, the feeling of unspoken camaraderie. And but it was almost like everybody had worked hard that whole week, but everybody was celebrating together over like a drink and a pipe or a cigar. And that's kind of like one of the best things about, I think, our industry is how it kind of, when you do these events, most of the people are never in a bad mood, right? They're always unwinding and relaxing. And in some regard, maybe you're not thinking about it or subconscious, but in some regard, you're kind of celebrating in a small micro way. And that's the magic of the product to me.
Amen.
So I appreciate you having me on here, that I can be a part of your community, because certainly I could feel that camaraderie and warmth here, even though we're all virtual. We can still enjoy cigars in our own way while we're doing this. So I appreciate you, Reinhard, establishing this platform and having me be a part of it. It was certainly my pleasure and honor, and I could talk about this all day. I love it.
It's a privilege for us, Tim. Thank you so much again. And I very much look forward.
Can I make one comment before we go?
Of course, please, Michael, anytime.
Thank you again, Reinhard, for hosting. Jose, it's always a pleasure for you to share your wealth of knowledge in this industry. Thank you for being here every time I've been here. Tim, it's a pleasure to meet you. Your sense of humor and your cigars are just fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very kind.
What my comment was, it's not necessarily a question, it's just a thank you for reinvesting in the arts. The center, I know nothing about it in Nashville, but my wife is an artist, performer, teacher, many faceted individual, and I'm quite boring. But I just wanted to thank you for recognizing that the arts need reinvesting in. She spent 8 years in Europe, where the performers don't have to work 2 part-time jobs to get a meal.
Yeah.
So thank you for supporting that. It's important to us.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, to go from a cigar business into starting a nonprofit contemporary art center, that's going from one complex problem to another one. So, but that's the thing. The cigar business trained us well for doing that, and we feel like that, and again, like I said, arts are an art as well. So I feel like arts are such an important mirror, or an important way that we can gain understanding to one another and to the world around us. And a lot of times, if you think about it, some of the most inspiring moments of your life might be through arts. I mean, it could be something that you streamed and even watched on your TV. That's also, part of an art. So I feel like it's really important in a lot of ways. Sometimes it's easy to overlook or to underestimate, but I think art has a significant impact in all of our lives, in ways that sometimes we don't, take the time to think about. So thank you for saying that. And, fortunately, it's all about the team. So, we have a really good team for the cigar business, and we have a really good team for the Arts Center. And there's a gentleman who's running that who has, 35 years of experience, and was hired previously by the Disney family to start something similar to ours in LA. So, if you're in Nashville, then come visit us. Our website is ozartsnashville.org.
Well, there's a good chance I could be there in a couple of weeks. Cigar.com forum is having a HERF in Colombia, and I'm driving from Albuquerque to Colombia just to hang with these cigar nerds. That'll tell you what kind of group.
Okay. That's good. That's good to know. I know you're going in Colombia then. You know, because there's a gentleman that has he's making briars over there, and he also has a retail store. You're probably going to his store.
Probably.
Yeah. So in a couple of weeks, I mean, I'm trying to think, what is the exact date?
20th and 21st, I believe. I'd have to look at the calendar.
Okay. I'm not sure if we have any performances there, and we tend to have like one performance like during one weekend of the month. I know that we have something this weekend, and we have something. We just had Joan Baez and Emmylou Harris this past weekend. It was more like a conversation of a new book. But we have like a dance company from South Africa coming in at the beginning of May. That's supposed to be fantastic. So
interesting.
Definitely.
Yeah, this HERF is going on in Colombia the 21st, 2nd, and 3rd.
Okay. Well, you know, right now, I mean, since we don't have like a website or any sort of contact from there, I'm just telling people like on Instagram, you know, if you go to @Oz Family Cigars or @Tim Ozgener, you can get in touch with me through there, or like you can just DM me from there.
Excellent. I like to make surprise visits, so you'll never know when somebody like me will show up. The other thing I want to say before I sign off, you mentioned you were learning improv comedy. I'm married up. My wife actually teaches improv acting and dancing. So stay in touch. Awesome. You might want to invite her to be a guest teacher.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, I love improv. It's served me well.
We all do it every day if we want to be healthy. We need a little bit of it.
Yeah, I know. You're right. You're right.
Anyway, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Michael, thank you so much for your final remarks and final comments. Tim, those 2 hours flew by. It's unbelievable. And what a joy it was to sit down with you and share and enjoy a cigar. I look forward to doing that in person and sharing one of the Oz Family Cigars with you soon to even better understand what's truly behind it and what all this legacy means and how it can be enjoyed and shared with the world. It was a sincere privilege and pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for everything that you shared with us, and I can only wish you from deepest of heart continued success and lots of joy with everything that you do. Many thanks again.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Reinhard. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to sharing a cigar in person for sure.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for chiming in today. Thanks everybody for watching. Stay tuned, stay connected. We'll see you again next Wednesday, same time, same station here at the Light 'em Up Lounge. Until then, light 'em up and take good care of yourselves. Goodbye, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Thanks,
Hey,
Reinhard.
good to see
Thanks,
you.
Tim.